Your project has a single dimension data flow defined. Now it's time to complete an iterative deployment and load your product dimension. After logging in, you'll be redirected to your account's project list. Let's jump straight over to our stage area so we can review our component usage map. Hover the stage top menu item and then select View Existing. In our little project, we just have one data flow. We're taking data from a data source, staging it, bringing it through a number of steps, and then loading it into a target dimension. If all of that succeeds, then we come back and we mark the records in PSA, consolidation area, as having been processed. So now that our project has all the components that we need to build before we deploy, we now need to go over to the precedence area and tell LeapFrogBI in which order do we want those components to be executed. So let's go to the Deploy top menu item and then select Precedence. Now, I'm not going to describe all of the details of the precedence solution here in this video. What I am going to do, however, is I'm going to get this set up so we can actually deploy and load successfully. So to do that, let's just take the shortcut of clicking this Autofill Order button. And what that does is it asks LeapFrogBI to go read all of the lineage that it knows about and apply that to the execution order that you see here represented numerically. So now I'm going to save those values. Now what I want to do is I want to visually inspect the execution order. So I'm going to click on Precedence Graph, and I'm going to scroll down a little bit so we can see this entire graph. Now, here in phase 10, the top section, all of these components need to complete before phase 20 begins. So I can see that there's basically two main phases of execution. The first component here is my stage component, followed by my PSA component, and then followed by that update component. Well, we don't want to update PSA. We don't want to mark those records as being processed until after our dimension load completes. So what we need to do is take this PSA component for our dimension update load status and place that after the product dimension completes. So let's jump back over to our precedence settings by clicking the Return to Precedence button. And let's see if we can make that happen. So here's our product dimension. It's the last record in this table. And it's set to phase 20. And then up here is our update component, dimension update load status component, and it's 10. So the first thing we do is make sure they're in the same phase. Now, the group is just a subset of the phase, so they're both in group 10. That's fine. And then the series is group 10 for both of them. That's fine. But then the sequence is 30. We want the DULS product to execute after the dimension, and sequence is a serial type assignment, ordinal, meaning a higher value will result in a later execution. So I'm going to change this to 40 so that it executes after my dimension. I'm going to save that. Now let's again go ahead and visually inspect this using the precedence graph. If I scroll down here, I can now see that my DULS product component, which is the update load status component, is executing after my dimension. So let's return to precedence, and now we're ready to deploy. Now I want to point out one more thing. Obviously we didn't touch on all the details of the precedence solution and how it worked, but in this precedence solution information area, you should read this and try to understand exactly how these settings are enabling you to run your execution process most efficiently, meaning whatever has to be serial is serial, and whatever can be parallel is run in parallel. All right, so let's go ahead and queue a build. And we do that again by hovering deploy and selecting a lifecycle. In this project, we start with the default project, so we only have one lifecycle. I'm going to select that lifecycle. In reality, when you're building out a project, you're probably going to have a combination of dev, tests, QA, prod, and maybe others. So each of those will represent an individual lifecycle. All right, so to queue a build, I'm just going to click this Make Current button. Now what that does is it queues a build. It tells LeapFrogBI that you want your build to be made current so you can download and deploy it. After this build is complete, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to download the build and deploy it to our deploy location that we previously set in the precedent settings. Okay, so the system just sent me an email saying that my build is done. I can see now that everything is complete. What you're looking for here, since we're going to be deploying a lifecycle, is the lifecycle archive. And it's this LFBI zip that actually contains all of my built assets. I can see the status is set to current, so I know I'm ready to deploy. Let's quickly look at what's going to be included in this build. If I scroll all the way to the bottom, the first thing is we have a list of components. Every component in your project will result in a single SSIS package being built. If we scroll up, we can see we have a lot of overhead. We have our centralized configuration that will be contained in a package. We have all the precedence functionality, such as the execution order, which we just talked about. But you also have the notification system if you want to set that up. You have a rollback process if you want to be able to roll back an entire job, a data dictionary, and so on. You have a schema management process that keeps your target schema in sync with your project definition. If it gets out of sync, then when we deploy, this process is going to generate alterations to ensure that my target schema stays in sync. All right, let's go ahead and download our build. So I'm going to click on this lfbi.zip, and I'm saving it to my parent of my deploy location. So to the parent of my deploy location. My deploy location is this LFBI folder you see here. So I'm saving it to the parent. Stick with me here for a second and you'll see why. If I now look at the downloaded LFBI zip, I need to extract its contents. So I'm going to extract all. And by default, the extract location includes a subfolder that will be generated if it doesn't exist with the name of the archive, which is LFBI. So if I just click extract, then everything's going to automatically go here into the correct deploy location. So that might save you one step. Now, this deploy package is what's going to do the deployment for us. But we need to do one more thing, and that is we need to create an environment variable that every package is going to use to know where its configuration is located. And this is known as the indirect connection to configuration. We could just hard code in every package and say your configuration is located here. But if we did that and the location of that configuration changes, then every package now needs to be touched. We don't want that. So instead, we tell every package, go figure out or go look at this environment variable's value to figure out where your configuration is located. So now, if the configuration location changes, I just need to change an environment variable's value, which is much easier to do. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our environment variable. There's a number of ways to get to the environment variables, but one way to do it is to right-click on this PC, go to Properties, Advanced System Settings, and then go to Environment Variables. Now we're going to be creating a system environment variable. That's the bottom section here, not the user environment variable. We wouldn't want to create a user variable because that requires the user to be logged in. So I'm going to click New. Now we need two pieces of information, the name of the variable and the value. So the name is real easy. Let's go back over to our deploy page, and right here on the top, I'm given the name. So I'm going to copy that name. I'm going to go back over to my variables and just simply paste in that name. Okay, now we need the value. And the value is a connection string pointing to the LeapFrogBI console database. We haven't really talked about this console database, but it's not really all that important right now. We've already made the decision that we're going to put everything in the same database, and that was the database we defined by our destination connection component. That location is actually the same instance of SQL Server as our data source. The only difference was it's a different database. We called that database CRM_Mart. So to get this connection string, I'm going to cheat here, and I'm just going to go back over to our profile generator download, and we've already set this connection UDL up so that it contains the connection string that we need with one minor alteration. So I'm going to open this up again in Notepad, And again, here's our connection string right here. So we have the provider, the integrated security, and so on. The thing that we need to change is the initial catalog, because we don't want the initial catalog to be our sample database. Now we want it to be the LeapFrog BI console, which happens to be the same thing, the same database as our dimension will be loaded into, and that's CRM_Mart. Now I have my connection string, so I can copy all this. I can go back over to my environment variables and paste this in here. We're done. So I click OK again, and OK again. Close this out. Our environment variable is saved. Now, one thing you need to know is LeapFrog BI is going to create SQL Server agent jobs, and it's the agent jobs that are actually going to be executing these packages. Well, the agent jobs only pick up environment variable values when the SQL Server agent is started. So we need to restart the SQL Server agent. If I go to Management Studio, right-click on SQL Server agent, and then click Restart, that'll take care of that little problem right away. Okay, so now our environment variable is created. The SQL Server agent is now restarted, so we can deploy. Go back over to my deploy location, which is here for me. And then I'm going to run this deploy job by simply double-clicking on it. That'll open up the execute package utility, and you're going to execute it. Now this is a really small package. It won't take more than a couple of seconds. Once it's done, the close button can be clicked, so we click that to close the package. Our project is now deployed. Let's go take a look at what happened. I'm going to refresh my database list by either clicking the refresh button, or you can right-click and then click refresh, or just click F5, however you want to do it. But now we can see we have a CRM Mart database, and if I look at the table list here, I have a few tables. These are all overhead tables. They're tables that are part of the LeapFrog BI console. Now we're co-locating these tables with everything else, as I've mentioned a number of times. You don't have to do that, but for this training project, it's perfectly fine. If we scroll down here and now look in the SQL Server jobs, I'm going to refresh this as well. We can see we have a number of jobs here. Now, these jobs, again, are responsible for executing the individual packages in the correct order, in the order that we defined in precedence. And it's actually the reset job that resets the load process on some interval. By default, it's actually set to reset daily, I think at like 1 a.m. We don't want this to actually run daily. There's no reason for it to. We're going to run it manually. So I'm going to disable this job. And then I'm going to run it manually. So I'm running the LFBI reset job by right-clicking on it and then clicking Start Job at Step. This is going to start the load process. Now I'm going to try to show you what's happening here by refreshing my table list. Okay, so now we can see that we have a new table here called S_product. That's our stage components output. Then we have a P_product. That's our PSA component. Let me refresh again. Select table, then click refresh. Now I can see I have a transformation component here, and our dimension is also here. So extremely small project. I have one view that's been created as well. Let's just take a quick look at our dimension that was created. That's what we have been doing all this work for, is to get this dimension created. So let's take a look at what happened here. Make this a little bigger. So this is a really small data set, but size is not important here. We're simply focused on functionality at this point. We'll get much more complex as you get familiar with the platform. So we have our surrogate key here, which is the LFBI ID. The first record has a -1 surrogate value. That's our unknown member record. Then we have our load time. This is the time that the record was actually loaded into the dimension, the ETL time. The next 3 fields are slowly changing dimension tracking fields. So it's the effective time, start and end, as well as a current record flag. Then we get into the meat of the table. We have our product ID. That happens to be our natural key in this dimension. And then the 3 attributes that we included in this dimension. And that's really it. There's a lot more to talk about. For example, we haven't even started talking about the monitoring solution that sits on top of your project. It leverages SQL Server reporting services so you can see in real time the execution process as well as historical lapse times and row counts and so on. We'll get to that in future training sessions. But for now, you've gone through the whole process of taking data from a data source and loading it into a dimension. Hopefully you can understand or visualize how you might continue along this road and create your second dimension and deploy your third dimension. And at some point, once you're ready to deploy your fact table, you go ahead and deploy that. And you just iteratively deploy your project without having to be so concerned with managing the schema and developing all this code. LeapFrog BI eliminates a lot of that work, hopefully allowing you to focus on what's important. And that's helping the business meet their objectives. So thank you so much for spending the time with me to learn a little about the LeapFrog BI platform. If you have any questions or requests at all, please do send us a note at support@leapfrogbi.com.